I bought my corner lot home in suburban Raleigh because of the backyard. Real estate agents call it curb appeal, that first impression when you pull up to a house, but for me, it was all about what happened behind the facade. The previous owners had planted Japanese maples along the perimeter, their leaves a deep burgundy against the cedar fence. A stoned path wound through raised garden beds, and the patio had enough space for my grill, smoker, and a table that could seat 8 comfortably. The mortgage stretched my budget thin, but I'd taken one look at that yard and pictured Saturday afternoons with friends, music from portable speakers, and the smell of hickory smoke curling through the air. 3 years in, that vision had become reality. I'd added climbing roses along the eastern fence, built a fire pit ringed with Adirondack chairs, and installed landscape lighting that made the whole space glow amber after sunset. The Oak Ridge Estates Homeowners Association had other priorities. Within my first month, I'd received a notice about my mailbox. Apparently, forest green violated the approved color palette, which specified hunter green instead. 6 months later, they'd objected to my choice of marigolds in the front beds, citing neighborhood aesthetic continuity. I'd tossed both notices into my recycling bin and kept writing my quarterly dues checks. The morning had started normally enough. I'd woken early, made coffee, and was about to head out for my usual Saturday yard work when movement beyond my kitchen window caught my eye. 3 people stood in my backyard, clipboards in hand, pointing at various spots on my lawn. I recognized them immediately. Carol Schmidt, the HOA president with her perfect helmet of blonde hair, Gerald Martinez, treasurer, mustache trimmed with military precision, and Sarah Baker, secretary, who was making notes on what looked like a tablet. I didn't bother with shoes. The grass felt cool and damp as I crossed the yard, coffee mug still in hand. "Morning," I said, watching Carol's smile tighten at the corners. "Don't remember scheduling a garden tour today." Carol turned, pearls gleaming at her throat. "Thomas, good morning. We were just taking some measurements." "Measurements," I repeated, watching Gerald step deliberately from one spot to another, counting under his breath. My coffee had gone bitter in my mouth. "For the spring social," Carol continued, waving her hand as if encompassing a vision only she could see. "Your yard is perfect. Corner lot, plenty of space. We're thinking a large tent here." She pointed to my central lawn area. "Catering tables along this edge, and perhaps the band near the patio." I took a slow sip of coffee, buying time to process what I was hearing. "The spring social." "It's going to be wonderful," Sarah chimed in, tapping something into her tablet. "We're expecting at least 60 residents this year." "In my backyard." Carol's smile didn't waver, though her eyes narrowed slightly. "The Community Spring Social is our biggest event of the year, Thomas. Surely you received the newsletter?" I had. It sat unopened on my kitchen counter with the rest of yesterday's mail. "Carol," I said, setting my mug on the edge of my patio table, "this is private property, my property. You can't just decide to host a community event here without asking me." Gerald looked up from his measuring, brow furrowed as if I'd said something incomprehensible. "Oh, Thomas." Carol laughed lightly, the sound like ice cubes clinking in a glass. "The HOA has an easement for community functions. It's in the bylaws. All corner lots are designated as potential event spaces." "Show me." The words came out harder than I'd intended. "Show me exactly where that's written." Carol's hand went to her pearls, fingers closing around them. "Well, I don't have the documents with me right now, but I can have Sarah drop off a copy later today." Sarah nodded quickly, not meeting my eyes. "Until I see that in writing," I said, "I'm not giving permission for any event to be held on my property. Please leave." "Now, Thomas," Gerald started, but Carol raised a hand, cutting him off. "We'll get you that documentation," she said, her tone shifting to something honeyed and placating. "I'm sure once you review it, you'll understand. The Spring Social has always been one of our most beloved traditions." "Documentation," I repeated. "Today." They filed out through my side gate, Carol turning to give me one last smile that didn't reach her eyes. "We'll be in touch." I watched them walk down the sidewalk toward Carol's house 3 doors down, their heads bent together in conversation. The clipboards and tablet troubled me. They'd clearly been planning this for some time, all without a single word to me. The morning stretched on. I weeded the vegetable garden, turned the compost pile, and pressure-washed the patio furniture, all while waiting for a knock at the door that never came. No documentation appeared. By late afternoon, as shadows lengthened across my yard, an uneasy feeling had settled in my gut. The image of Carol standing in my backyard, confidently claiming rights to it, kept replaying in my mind. After dinner, I pulled out the banker's box I'd labeled House Documents the day I moved in. It sat in the back of my office closet, untouched since then. I placed it on my desk and began removing folders: mortgage paperwork, insurance policies, inspection reports. At the bottom lay the items I was looking for: my property deed, title report, and a thick stapled document with Oak Ridge Estates Homeowners Association covenants, conditions, and restrictions, printed on the cover page. I spread everything out on my desk and began to read. If there was an easement on my property, it would be recorded somewhere. If the HOA truly had the right to commandeer my backyard for community events, I needed to know exactly what I'd agreed to when I signed those papers 3 years ago. The deed was straightforward, a legal description of the property with clearly defined boundaries. The title report listed standard utility easements along the street-facing sides of the lot. Nothing unusual there. I flipped through page after page of the HOA agreement, skimming sections about exterior paint colors, lawn maintenance requirements, and holiday decoration restrictions. Hours passed. My desk lamp cast a warm circle of light as the rest of the house fell into darkness. I took careful notes, marking relevant sections with sticky tabs. The more I read, the more certain I became that something wasn't right about Carol's claim. By midnight, my eyes burned from squinting at the fine print, but I wasn't ready to stop. I turned another page, determined to understand exactly where I stood. I found it on page 43, buried under a section titled Common Area Maintenance and Access. My finger traced the lines of dense legalese, my desk lamp casting shadows across the page. 3 in the morning, and my second cup of coffee had gone cold beside me. The association maintains exclusive rights to designated common areas, including, but not limited to, the entrance monument, perimeter landscaping, community playground, retention pond, and walking paths. Nothing about corner lots. Nothing about easements for social events. I flipped back and forth, checking cross-references, but found only standard utility easements along the street-facing sides. Nothing that gave Carol Schmidt or the Oak Ridge Estates HOA any claim to my backyard. I pushed away from my desk, stretching arms overhead until my spine cracked. The house creaked around me, settling into night. My eyes burned from hours of reading, but adrenaline kept sleep at bay. My laptop screen glowed as I navigated to the County Property Records website. The interface was clunky, designed by someone who thought the early 2000s represented the pinnacle of web design, but it worked. I entered my address and downloaded every available document: deed, plat map, previous sales records, tax history. The printer whirred and clicked in the corner of my office, spitting out page after page. My property's history in black and white, official stamps and signatures marking each transfer of ownership since the land was first subdivided 30 years ago. I spread them across the floor in chronological order, creating a paper timeline. Nothing. No recorded easements beyond standard utilities. No special provisions for corner lots. No amendments giving the HOA rights to commandeer private property for community functions. Sleep pulled at me, but this wasn't finished. I opened my browser again and found the county zoning regulations. Somewhere in this digital labyrinth was the information I needed to protect what was mine. The sky outside my window shifted from black to charcoal gray as I read about setbacks and variances and permitted uses. My eyes skimmed paragraph after paragraph until 3 words jumped out: Homeowners Association Authority. I sat up straighter, caffeine forgotten as I read. Homeowners associations may regulate and maintain designated common areas as defined in their founding documents. HOAs have no authority to access, maintain, or utilize privately owned parcels without a recorded easement or express written permission from the property owner. The words burned into my brain. No authority, no recorded easement. I'd found what I needed. I printed the page, then went back for more, downloading the county's legal definition of trespassing and property rights statutes. The printer continued its mechanical huffing as the first hints of dawn appeared through my blinds. Birds began their morning chorus as I finally crawled into bed, mind racing with plans for what came next. Sleep took me almost instantly, but it wasn't restful. I dreamed of people setting up tents in my yard while I shouted from behind a glass wall no one could hear through. I woke at noon, groggy but determined. Sunday stretched before me, usually reserved for reading the paper and meal prep for the week. Today had different demands. Back at my desk, I sorted the scattered papers into organized piles: property documents here, county regulations there, HOA bylaws in a third stack. The structure helped clarify my thoughts. I pulled out fresh paper and began drafting a letter. Not an angry screed, something factual, cold, and unassailable. I'd worked enough with legal documents in my corporate job to mimic their tone. Dear board members of the Oak Ridge Estates Homeowners Association, it has come to my attention during your unauthorized entry onto my property on Saturday, March 12th, that you believe an easement exists granting the association rights to use my property at 742 Elmwood Corner for community events. After thorough review of all property records, including the original deed, attached, title report, attached, and HOA covenants, conditions, and restrictions, I can confirm that no such easement exists. My property boundaries are clearly defined in the attached survey, with no provisions for shared access beyond standard utility easements. Furthermore, Wake County Code Section 14.3.6 explicitly states, homeowners associations have no authority to access, maintain, or utilize privately owned parcels without a recorded easement or express written permission from the property owner. This letter serves as formal notice that 1. No permission is granted for the spring social or any other HOA event to take place on my property. 2. Any future unauthorized entry onto my property will constitute trespassing under North Carolina General Statute per 14-159. 12. I have highlighted the relevant property lines on the attached deed copy for your convenience. Should you have documentation contradicting these findings, please provide it immediately. Sincerely, Thomas Wilson, 742 Elmwood Corner, Oak Ridge Estates. I read it 3 times, tweaking language, removing emotion. The document printer in my home office hummed as I generated copies of my deed, property survey, and the relevant county codes, highlighting key sections in neon yellow. I made 4 identical packets, 1 for each board member and 1 for my records. The envelopes felt heavy in my hands as I addressed them. Carol Schmidt's name came first, my pen pressing harder than necessary as I wrote out her address. Gerald Martinez and Sarah Baker followed, each packet sealed with methodical precision. The post office was quiet for a Sunday afternoon. The clerk raised an eyebrow at my request for a certified mail with return receipt for all 3 envelopes. Important documents, she asked, affixing tracking labels. Just setting the record straight, I replied, paying the extra fee for proof of delivery. On the drive home, I stopped at the hardware store. The private property, no trespassing sign wasn't elegant, but subtlety wasn't my goal. The aluminum rectangle with bold black letters felt solid in my hands. I bought 4, 1 for each side of my fence, along with heavy-duty screws to secure them. The drill's whine seemed loud in the Sunday afternoon quiet as I mounted the first sign at my side gate, the one Carol and her clipboard brigade had used to access my yard. The metal felt cool against my fingers as I positioned it at eye level. Neighbors walking dogs slowed to watch, curiosity evident in their lingering gazes. Let them look. Let them wonder. Let them report back to Carol. One by one, I secured the remaining signs. Front fence, back corner, opposite side. My property was now visibly marked, my boundaries explicit. Standing back to survey my work, I felt a strange mix of satisfaction and unease. I'd claimed my space, protected what was mine. Yet something about those signs felt aggressive in this manicured subdivision where conflict typically remained buried beneath pleasantries and passive-aggressive comments about lawn care. Inside, I washed dirt from my hands and poured a glass of iced tea. The kitchen window framed my backyard like a painting. Japanese maples rustling in the breeze, raised garden beds where tomato seedlings were just pushing through the soil. The space felt more precious somehow, now that I'd had to defend it. My phone buzzed on the counter, a group text from friends about next weekend's planned barbecue. Normal life continuing while I'd spent 24 hours in a legal rabbit hole. I responded with a thumbs-up emoji, then set the phone aside. Monday would bring consequences. Carol receiving my letter. Neighbors noticing the signs. The invisible social web of Oak Ridge estates stretching and possibly tearing around me. Some would side with the HOA, seeing me as difficult, uncooperative. Others might silently approve but keep their distance to avoid being associated with my rebellion. I rehearsed potential confrontations in my head. If Carol approached me directly, "The legal documents speak for themselves, Carol. There's no easement." If she tried another angle, "This isn't about community spirit, it's about respecting private property." If she brought up unrelated HOA violations to retaliate, I'm happy to discuss those separately, once this boundary issue is resolved. Outside my window, a family walked past, parents with a toddler on a tricycle. The father's eyes tracked to my "no trespassing" sign, then quickly away. I wondered what story would circulate about me now. The refrigerator hummed. Ice shifted in my glass. The social calculus of neighborhood politics wasn't in my favor, but the legal facts were. I'd chosen the hill to die on. 742 Elmwood Corner, 0.38 acres, corner lot with Japanese maples and absolutely no easement for community functions. I sipped my tea and waited for the certified letters to land. The certified mail receipts arrived exactly 2 days later. 3 identical green cards with scribbled signatures confirming Carol, Gerald, and Sarah had received my letters. I tucked them into my documentation folder, another piece of evidence should this escalate further. The small victory felt good, knowing they'd been forced to physically acknowledge my boundary setting with a signature. I was pruning my Japanese maples that afternoon when the doorbell rang. The front windows showed Carol's powder blue sedan parked at the curb. Perfect timing. I just finished the eastern side of my yard, my hands dirt-smudged but not filthy enough to justify declining visitors. I wiped my palms against my jeans and pulled open the door. Carol stood on my welcome mat holding a plastic container of what appeared to be chocolate chip cookies. Her pearl necklace caught the afternoon light, and her smile stretched so tight it must have hurt her face. "Thomas," she said, lifting the container like a peace offering, "I thought we might clear the air." I didn't invite her inside. The threshold became my line of demarcation. Her on the porch, me in the doorway. The cookies remained suspended between us. "That's thoughtful," I said, not reaching for them. Her smile flickered but held. "About the certified letter. You got it then." "Yes." Her fingers tightened around the cookie container. "There's been a misunderstanding. I've reviewed our records, and it seems the easement transfer wasn't properly documented when the subdivision was developed." She paused, a practiced, sorrowful expression crossing her face. "When the original developer sold off these lots, The paperwork for community use of corner properties should have been filed with the deed transfers. I'd expected something like this, an attempt to rewrite history rather than admit she'd made it up entirely. The crafted explanation, delivered with practiced sincerity, might have worked on someone who hadn't spent hours studying their property documents. "Carol," I cut in, "there was never an easement to transfer. Not on the original plat maps, not in the developer's plans, nowhere. I've checked every record going back to when this was just farmland." Her eyes hardened while her smile remained fixed. "These technicalities aren't technicalities, they're property laws." I kept my tone even, factual. "My backyard is private property. That's not negotiable." She shifted the cookie container to her left hand, right hand rising to touch her pearls. "The spring social has always been our signature event, Thomas. The community can expect it to be held in a community space. My yard isn't one." A muscle twitched beneath her eye. "You're being unnecessarily difficult. We could have worked something out that benefited everyone." "No trespassing means no trespassing, Carol. The signs aren't decorative." Between us, the silence stretched uncomfortably. A breeze rustled the crepe myrtle by my driveway, sending a few pink petals spiraling to the ground. "I see." She clutched the cookie container tighter. "Well, the board will need to make alternate arrangements. That would be appropriate." I didn't soften my stance with platitudes about community spirit or wishing them well. "These are double chocolate chip," she said, thrusting the container forward one last time. "I baked them this morning." I took the container, not wanting to add unnecessary rudeness to our conflict. "Thank you." She nodded stiffly and turned to leave. 3 steps down my walkway, she paused and looked back. "You know, Thomas, communities work best when everyone participates in the spirit of cooperation." "I agree completely," I replied. "Cooperation starts with respect for boundaries." I closed the door before she could respond, waiting until I heard her car start before moving away from the entryway. The cookie container felt light in my hands. I carried it to the kitchen and lifted the lid. Store-bought cookies arranged on a paper towel. The price sticker was still visible on the bottom edge, hastily picked at but not completely removed. I dumped the cookies into my compost bin. Even the raccoons deserved better than Carol's performative peace offering. The relocated spring social took place the following Saturday at the small park near the neighborhood entrance. A strip of grass with a couple of cement picnic tables and a sad-looking collection of playground equipment. From my bedroom window, I watched the setup crew struggle to anchor the event tent. They'd positioned it near the subdivision sign, a spot with no natural shade and directly exposed to the afternoon sun. My own backyard was prepped for a different gathering. I'd invited 4 couples over for an impromptu barbecue, friends from work and their partners. None were Oak Ridge Estates residents, which was precisely the point. This wasn't about competing with the HOA event. It was about reclaiming my space for its intended purpose. Hospitality on my terms. I fired up my smoker at 10 that morning, loading it with hickory chunks and 2 racks of ribs rubbed with my signature spice blend. The process was methodical, almost meditative. Trim the membrane, massage in the rub, arrange the meat on the racks, adjust the vents for the perfect temperature. By noon, thin blue smoke curled over my fence, carrying the scent of slow-cooking pork across the neighborhood. My dog, Cooper, a rescue mutt with boundless energy, zoomed happy circles around the yard as I set up lawn games. His adoption had been another minor HOA battle. Carol had once left a note about his barking, though he rarely made noise beyond an occasional interested woof at passing squirrels. Today, he wore his red bandana, fresh from a bath, looking almost as pleased about our backyard sovereignty as I felt. My first guests arrived at 3, just as Cooper and I finished setting up the cornhole boards. Dave and Melissa brought homemade coleslaw and a cooler of local craft beers. The others followed within the half hour, carrying side dishes and desserts. Music played from my outdoor speakers, not loud enough to violate noise ordinances, but sufficient to create a backdrop of blues and classic rock that drifted beyond my fence line. Cooper raced between guests, accepting ear scratches and dropping tennis balls at feet until someone threw one for him. The ribs came off the smoker at 4:30, pink smoke rings visible when I cut into the test piece. Conversations flowed across my patio as I slathered on sauce and finished them on the grill, the caramelizing sugar sending up another wave of mouth-watering aroma. "Man, that smell is killing me," Dave said, wandering over with an empty beer bottle. "How much longer?" I flipped a rack, the sauce sizzling against hot grates. 5 minutes. Grab another beer and tell everyone to find a seat." From beyond my fence came thin, tinny music. The HOA's portable speaker no match for the band they'd originally planned. A child wailed, the sound cutting through the afternoon heat. I glanced over during a lull in conversation and caught glimpses of residents huddled under the event tent's narrow shade, fanning themselves with paper plates. By 5, we were seated around my patio table, plates loaded with falling-off-the-bone ribs, 3 kinds of salad, grilled corn, and garlic bread. Cooper lay beneath the table, contentedly gnawing a rawhide bone, occasionally looking up when laughter erupted. "To good food and better company," I toasted, lifting my beer bottle. As dusk approached, I lit the landscape lighting and strung additional bulbs across the patio. The yard transformed into the amber-lit haven I'd envisioned when buying the place. We moved to the fire pit area, conversation mellowing as darkness fell. Cooper stretched out nearby, exhausted from an afternoon of fetch and attention. Around 8, headlights swept across my fence as cars departed the HOA event. Many had left earlier. I'd noted the exodus beginning around 6 when the direct sun and limited refreshments had apparently overwhelmed community spirit. Our gathering continued past 10, friends lingering around the fire pit with drinks and conversation. After the last guest departed, I stood alone in my backyard. Embers glowed in the fire pit. Cooper snored softly near my feet. String lights cast gentle shadows across the garden beds. This was precisely what I'd fought for. Not just property rights, but the right to use my space as I'd intended. The weeks following our dueling events brought an unexpected change. Silence from the HOA. No violation notices appeared in my mailbox. No clipboard brigades surveyed my yard. One evening, while watering my vegetable garden, I caught my next-door neighbor Ethan watching over the fence. He'd always been polite but distant, careful not to get drawn into HOA politics. "Those tomatoes are coming along," he called, a tentative olive branch. I nodded, adjusting the spray pattern on my hose. "Should have the first ripe ones by next week." He glanced around, then lowered his voice. "That letter you sent the board, pretty effective. Just stating facts. Well." He rubbed the back of his neck. "Some of us appreciated it. Carol's been on a power trip since she took over last year." The conversation shifted to safer topics. Lawnmowers, the upcoming hurricane season, a water main break 2 streets over. But something had changed. Word had spread. My stand had resonated beyond my property line. Similar interactions followed. Mrs. Kapoor from across the street mentioned that the HOA had suddenly approved her request to install solar panels after 3 previous rejections. Jim from the cul-de-sac reported that his retroactive fine for an unapproved garden shed had been mysteriously dropped. At the quarterly HOA meeting, which I attended armed with my documentation folder, unnecessary but reassuring, Carol avoided eye contact entirely. Sarah Baker, however, sought me out during the refreshment break. "Your research was very thorough," she said quietly, stirring creamer into her coffee. "Some of us—" She glanced toward Carol, deep in conversation across the room. "Some of us are reconsidering how strictly certain rules need to be enforced." I nodded, accepting this partial olive branch. Rules work best when they're actually in the bylaws, not invented on the spot. The meeting proceeded with unusual efficiency. Carol spoke less, deferring to committee reports rather than inserting her interpretation of every issue. Gerald seemed less certain in his pronouncements about regulation violations. The atmosphere felt different, less dictatorial, more administrative. As spring turned to summer, I hosted more backyard gatherings. My garden flourished. Cooper continued his squirrel surveillance operations. The no trespassing signs remained, though they no longer felt necessary. They'd done their job. What I'd won wasn't just about keeping the HOA off my property. It was about establishing a precedent that affected everyone in Oak Ridge Estates. Knowledge beat intimidation. Documentation trumped claims. One homeowner with proper research could balance the scales against overzealous enforcement. I replanted my front beds with marigolds again that summer, their bright orange blooms a reminder that some boundaries were worth defending. My forest green mailbox gleamed in the sun, undisturbed by violation notices. The Japanese maples along my fence line grew fuller, their burgundy leaves creating the privacy screen I'd envisioned when I first bought the place. My yard was mine again. The peace well earned. The certified mail receipts stayed in my documentation folder. Insurance against future overreach. Proof that standing your ground worked when you had facts on your side.